You can recite your trauma like a resume. You know your attachment style, your Enneagram number, your human design chart, the exact ways your childhood shaped you. You've done the therapy, read the books, listened to the podcasts. You speak fluently in the language of nervous system regulation, inner child work, and shadow integration. Healing is no longer something you do, it's who you are. You're the friend people come to for advice, the one who understands psychology, the one who's always working on themselves. And on the surface, that looks like growth, like self awareness, like someone who's doing the work. But if you're honest, really honest, there's a part of you that wonders, why doesn't my life actually feel different? Why am I still in the same patterns? Why do I still feel stuck? Why does all this awareness, all this effort, all this healing, why doesn't it translate into actually living? If that question is whispering in the back of your mind, what I'm about to say might be uncomfortable, but it might also be the thing that finally sets you free. Because according to Dr. Gabor Maté, there's a difference between healing and identifying as someone who's healing. And when healing becomes your identity instead of a process you're moving through, it stops being the path forward. It becomes the place you stay stuck. Let's talk about what this actually looks like. You're in therapy. You've been in therapy for years. Maybe you've cycled through multiple therapists, multiple modalities, multiple frameworks, and you can articulate exactly what's wrong. You can trace every behavior back to its origin. You understand the why behind everything you do. But understanding hasn't changed the doing. You still can't set boundaries without guilt. You still attract the same kind of relationships. You still feel the same anxiety, the same emptiness, the same sense that something is fundamentally wrong. But now you have language for it. You have concepts. You have a narrative. And somehow, having the narrative has become more comfortable than changing the story. Or maybe you've built your entire social life around healing. Your friends are all in therapy. Your conversations revolve around trauma, triggers, and childhood wounds. You bond over what's broken, not what's possible. And there's nothing wrong with that. Finding people who understand your pain is important. But when every relationship is defined by shared woundedness, when the only way you know how to connect is through discussing what's damaged in you, that's not community. That's a support group you never leave. Or maybe you've turned healing into content. You post about your journey. You share your insights. You perform your growth for an audience that validates you for being self-aware. And every like, every comment, every this is so relatable gives you something you've been missing your whole life. Visibility, significance, proof that your pain matters. But you're no longer healing for yourself. You're healing for the performance of it. And the performance has become more important than the progress. Here's what Gabor Maté would ask you. Are you healing or are you identifying as someone who needs to heal? Because those are two very different things. Healing is a process. It has movement. It has stages. It is an arc that bends toward integration, toward wholeness, toward living. But identification is static. It's a fixed point, a story you tell about yourself that becomes the boundary of what's possible. When you identify as traumatized, you unconsciously organize your life around that identity. You notice the evidence that confirms it. You interpret ambiguous situations through the lens of your wound. You relate to others based on shared damage rather than shared joy. And you resist experiences that contradict the identity, even when those experiences are exactly what you need to heal. Because if you're no longer the wounded one, the one who's healing, the one who's working on themselves, then who are you? And that question is terrifying. Because for many people, their wound is the most interesting thing about them. It's what makes them deep, introspective, different from people who are quote unquote still asleep. It's what gives them permission to struggle, to not have it all together, to be in process indefinitely. And letting go of that, letting go of the identity of being wounded, feels like losing yourself. But here's the truth. It's not losing yourself. It's finding yourself. The self that exists beyond the wound, beyond the story, beyond the endless analysis of what's wrong. So, how did healing become an identity in the first place? For most people, it starts with something real, a genuine need to understand what happened to them, to make sense of patterns that have been running their life. And that work is sacred, that work is necessary. But somewhere along the way, a shift happens. The healing stops being a means to an end and starts being the end itself. You stop asking, how do I heal so I can live? And start asking, how do I heal more? The goalposts keep moving. There's always another layer, another wound, another part of you that needs to be excavated, examined, understood. And you start to believe that you can't move forward until you've healed everything. That you can't pursue your dreams until you've resolved your childhood. That you can't be in a relationship until you've fixed your attachment style. That you can't take up space until you've done enough inner work to deserve it. So you keep working, keep digging, keep analyzing, but you never actually build the life you say you're healing for. Because building that life would require you to stop identifying as someone who's broken. And you're not ready to let that go yet. Gabor Maté talks about this in the context of what he calls therapeutic dependency. It's when therapy or healing work or self-improvement becomes a way to avoid living. It gives you a sense of progress without requiring actual change. You're doing something, you're working on yourself, you're aware, but awareness without action is just another form of avoidance. And the tragedy is, you're often avoiding the very things that would actually heal you, like taking risks, like being vulnerable in real relationships, not just therapeutic ones, like pursuing the career, the move, the dream that terrifies you. You tell yourself you're not ready yet, that you need to heal more first, that once you've worked through this issue, then you'll take the leap. But the issue is never fully worked through because you're using the healing process to protect yourself from the vulnerability of actually living. And that's not healing, that's hiding. Let's be specific about what this looks like in practice. You've been talking about the same childhood wound for 5 years. You can describe it in exquisite detail. You understand exactly how it shaped you, but you haven't confronted the parent who caused it. You haven't set the boundary that would change the dynamic. You haven't stopped waiting for them to acknowledge what they did. You're processing the wound, but you're not moving past it. Or you've identified your attachment style. You know you're anxious or avoidant or disorganized. And you use that knowledge to explain your behavior in relationships, to predict why things won't work, to justify why you can't trust, can't commit, can't let anyone in. But you're not actually doing the work to create our insecurity. You're just using the label as a reason to stay stuck. Or you've done all the inner child work, you've visualized, journaled, reparented, but you're still living your life in ways that abandon that child every day. You're still saying yes when you mean no, still staying in situations that harm you, still treating yourself the way you were treated. The inner child work has become a ritual, not a relationship, a concept, not a change. And here's the uncomfortable part. Sometimes staying stuck is safer than healing. Because if you heal, you have to take responsibility. You can't blame your childhood anymore. You can't use your trauma as the reason you haven't pursued your dreams. You can't hide behind the identity of being wounded. You have to show up fully as someone who's capable, who's responsible, who has agency. And that's terrifying. Because what if you try and you fail? What if you show up as your healed self and you're still not enough? At least when you're wounded, you have an excuse. The world hurt you. You're doing your best. You're in process. But when you're healed, there's no one left to blame, just you and your choices and the life you're either building or avoiding. And for many people, that's too much. So they stay in the healing indefinitely. They make it their identity, their personality, the thing they're known for. And they mistake the performance of healing for the experience of it. So how do you know if healing has become your identity? Ask yourself these questions. Do you talk more about your healing journey than you do about your actual life? Do you know more about what's wrong with you than what's right with you? Do you spend more time analyzing why you're stuck than taking action to get unstuck? Do you feel more comfortable in conversations about trauma than in conversations about joy, possibility, or the future? Do you use your healing journey as a reason to delay living, to delay pursuing what you actually want? Do you feel a sense of identity, belonging, or significance from being wounded that you're afraid you'll lose if you heal? Do you resist experiences that would contradict your narrative, like success, healthy love, or feeling genuinely happy? If you answered yes to any of these, you're not broken. But you might be using healing the way some people use work or relationships or substances as a way to avoid the discomfort of actually changing. And the invitation here isn't to stop healing, it's to start living. Because here's what Gabor Maté wants you to understand. Healing is not the destination, living is. Healing is what you do so you can be present for your life, so you can take risks, so you can love and be loved, so you can create, contribute, connect. But if all you're doing is healing, if your entire existence revolves around understanding your wounds and never moving beyond them, you're not living. You're curating a very self-aware version of staying stuck. And the life you're healing for, it's passing you by. The relationship you're waiting to be ready for, it's happening now, and you're missing it because you're still analyzing why you're not ready. The career you're going to pursue once you've worked through your fear of visibility, other people are pursuing it while you're still journaling about why you're afraid. The joy, the spontaneity, the messiness of being human, you're avoiding it all in the name of being more self-aware. But self-awareness without self-expression is just self-imprisonment. So what does it actually look like to heal without making it your identity? It looks like doing the therapeutic work and then closing the journal and going out into the world. It looks like understanding your patterns and then choosing differently, even when it's uncomfortable. It looks like processing your wounds and then taking action on your dreams anyway, not after you've healed, but while you're healing. It looks like building a life that's not defined by what you're recovering from, but by what you're moving toward. And that requires a fundamental shift from I am someone who was hurt to I am someone who experienced hurt and is choosing differently now. From I am traumatized to I carry trauma and I'm learning to live alongside it. From I am healing to I am healed enough to start. That last one is the hardest because your mind will tell you you're not ready, that you need more time, more therapy, more inner work. But the truth is, you'll never feel ready. You'll never feel healed enough, whole enough, fixed enough. Because healing isn't about reaching some perfect state where you're no longer affected by your past. It's about integrating your past enough that it's no longer running your present. And that integration doesn't happen in a therapist's office. It happens in real life, in the conversation you have, even though you're scared, in the boundary you set, even though you've never done it before, in the risk you take, even though you might fail. That's where healing becomes real, not in the talking about it, in the doing despite it. And here's what happens when you start living instead of just healing. You discover that you're more resilient than you thought, that you can handle discomfort, that you can fail and survive, that you can be seen and not be destroyed. You discover that your worth isn't tied to how much you've suffered or how deeply you understand your suffering. Your worth is inherent. It exists whether you're wounded or whole, whether you're in process or done. You discover that the people who love you don't love you because you're working on yourself. They love you because of who you are when you're not performing growth, when you're just being messy, imperfect, human. And you discover that life doesn't wait for you to be ready. It's happening now. And you can either show up for it, wounded, imperfect, still healing, or you can keep waiting for some future version of yourself who has it all figured out. But that version doesn't exist. This is it. This is the version. The one who's still figuring it out, still carrying wounds, still afraid, and that version is enough to start. Gabor Maté often says, the wound is not your fault, but the healing is your responsibility. And I'd add, the living is your responsibility too. Because you can heal forever. You can go deeper and deeper into your psyche, uncovering layer after layer. But at some point, you have to ask, what am I healing for? If the answer is, so I can finally be good enough, you'll never stop healing. Because enough is not a destination, it's a decision. But if the answer is so I can live the life I actually want, then healing has a purpose beyond itself. And that purpose is what pulls you forward. It's what gets you out of the analysis and into the action. It's what shifts healing from an identity into a tool you use not to avoid life, but to engage with it more fully. So here's the practice. For the next week, notice how much time you spend talking about your healing versus living your life. Notice how much mental energy goes to analyzing what's wrong versus imagining what's possible. Notice how often you use your wounds as an explanation versus a starting point. And then ask yourself, what would I do if I believed I was healed enough right now? Not perfectly healed, not completely healed, just enough. What risk would you take? What conversation would you have? What dream would you pursue? And then do one thing, just one, in that direction. Not after you've worked through it, not once you're ready, now, while you're still afraid, while you're still imperfect, while you're still carrying the wound. Because that's what integration looks like. Not waiting until you're whole to start living, but living your way into wholeness. And here's what you'll discover. The healing you've been searching for doesn't happen in the endless examination of your past. It happens in the courageous engagement with your present. In the moment you choose yourself, even though you're scared. In the moment you take up space, even though you feel unworthy. In the moment you pursue joy, even though you've spent years defining yourself by your pain. Those moments, those choices, that's where the transformation happens. Not in understanding why you're stuck, but in moving anyway. Not in identifying as wounded, but in recognizing yourself as someone who's been hurt and is choosing to live fully anyway. And when you do that, healing stops being your personality. It becomes your history, the thing you did, the work you honored, the process you moved through, but it's not who you are anymore. Who you are is the person on the other side, the one who's building a life, who's taking risks, who's messy and imperfect and showing up anyway. That's the person you've been healing to become, and they've been waiting for you to stop preparing and start being them. So maybe it's time. Time to close the journal, end the session, stop the analysis, and start living. Not someday, not when you're ready, now. So here's my question for you. What's one thing you've been waiting to do until you're healed enough? And what would it look like to do it anyway? Drop it in the comments, not because you have to commit to it, but because naming it is the first step toward choosing it. And if this hit differently, if it made you realize you've been hiding in healing, consider subscribing. There's a lot more where this came from. Because the work isn't about becoming someone who's endlessly working on themselves. It's about becoming someone who's living fully, imperfectly, with all the wounds still healing, but living anyway. You don't need to be fixed to start. You just need to start, and the rest will unfold as you go.